I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening on behalf of Outer Banks Presbyterian and Roanoke Island Presbyterian. We're delighted to have Mina Talia here, and he will be doing a presentation for us. We also want to welcome those who are watching on the live stream or watching at a later time, and we'll have an opportunity for questions and some follow-up following his presentation. So let us begin.
Well, thank you so very much for the opportunity. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this afternoon or evening dialogue or discussion. And also thank you to Steve and the family for bringing me across to the island. Now I'm in the island. Mina Talia from Tuvalu. And I am not sure whether you heard about Tuvalu before or not. But Tuvalu used to be called the Gilbert and Ellis Island Colony back in the past. So when we became independent on the 1st of October 1978, we called ourselves Tuvalu. And Tuvalu literally means tu is to stand, Valu means 8. So there are 8 islands standing together in the vast Pacific Ocean. I have entitled my presentation as The Climate Crisis in Tuvalu. Migration is a definite no, but rather a matter of choice. And I believe most of you who are here can associate yourself with what I'll be talking about, because you live in coastal communities and basically confronted by the issue of climate change related sea level rise. And may I ask to play the clip for us? Yeah, please play. Thank you. Can you press the play that I showed you to press?
Oh, okay.
Thank you. I don't have a audio attached to the slide, but so it seems to be a very dry slide. But the clip, it's pretty wet. So it was a wave that struck Tuvalu in 2015 during Cyclone Pan. And this was on the island of Vaituku, where I come from. A wave that not only hit the island, but soaked the island for a couple of hours. The wave went through and seeped through the whole island, not the whole island, most part of the lower elevation part of the island, and went through to the other side, to the lagoon side. And raises a lot of questions, not just about their faith in God, but a lot of questions around what will be the future of this island. What will be the future of a young generation? For a community that lived for many thousands of years, for many centuries, and this was the first time to experience such a wave. And because the interest of time, I would skip the rest of the, but I saved the presentation on the computer. But this will give you a glimpse of what I will be talking about when I talk about climate change related sea level rise in Tuvalu, just to give you a glimpse of it. But we're so fortunate to have this wave during daylight, because I believe if it was during nighttime, I believe it would be totally a different story altogether. So you can see Tuvalu is midway between Australia and Hawaii. Just to the north of Fiji, you can see Tuvalu just to the north of Fiji, and to the south of Kiribati. And you can still, despite the fact that we became independent from the British. We still have the Union Jack on our flag. The monarch is still our sovereign. So during the Queen's funeral, we sent a high-level delegation to attend the funeral. The Governor General, which is the representative of the Queen in Tuvalu, and the Prime Minister, the delegation. We have an embassy here in the United States, which is up in New York, an ambassador to the US and to the UN. Despite the fact that we are small and remote, but we have participated in most of the regional and international activities. We participated in the Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games, and some other related activities. And as I said earlier, Tuvalu means 8 islands standing in the vast Pacific Ocean. We were once called the Gilbert and Ellice Island Colony back in the past, up until we became independent from the British. And since we do not have enough to offer the British, they let go of us easily. We don't have any goals or mine, or, it was, I believe it was an easy ride. With a population of around 10 to 11,000 people residing in Tuvalu, but approximately around 4,000 to 5,000 living in New Zealand. The highest point in the island is not above 5 meters. So Tuvalu is just a coral atoll island, no mountains, no rivers. We totally rely on rainwater harvesting nowadays, but before we use rainwater harvesting and also well water or bore water, underground water. But because of the increase of salinity in the water, most of our wells are no longer feasible for human consumption because of the increase of salinity. A total land mass of around 26 square kilometers of land. And sometimes when I look at some of the golf courses here in the US, I would say to my host that some of these golf courses are bigger than some of our islands. Probably the Central Park in New York is bigger than some of our islands. So the US is so fortunate to have a very large lands and unoccupied lands as well. You can see in the map is, on the slide is Funafuti, the capital of Tuvalu. And you can see right in the middle, there is an airstrip that was built by the US back in the days during the Second World War. But later the years we developed it to be a commercial airport for the country. When we talk about resources, we don't have much to offer the world in terms of participating in the global market. However, we have products that are just sufficient to be supplied locally, and we have a small amount that we send to New Zealand and other countries where there is a large population of Tuvaluans living there. But other than that, we have very limited resources to respond to any form of disaster or any existence or threat. So that's why we kept COVID out of the country. Tuvalu remained a COVID-free country. Excuse me. Because of the fact that we understand very well that once COVID gets into our borders, it will be very difficult for us to respond. We don't have the resources and very little that we can do to respond unless with the support of the international community. So last month, the government have relaxed some of our border restrictions in order for not just to the Tuvaluan citizens, but those who wish to visit Tuvalu to return. So tourism is not a big thing in the island. Of course, we do receive tourists in the country, but not big as other countries. When it comes to revenue, we have some other revenues, but these are the two that I would like to highlight tonight. It's the .tv domain. .tv domain, or in the United States, it's they have been allocated the .com as the US suffix that associated with the country. For Australia, they have the .au, and Tuvalu were given the .tv domain. And we made a couple of millions out of the .tv domain, because most of the websites, sports, that to do with the .tv domain, the money comes to the country. So we contracted the GoDaddy company here in the US to look after the domain on our behalf, although we take full ownership of the .tv. Another issue that I want to highlight, a revenue that I want to highlight, is issuing license for fishing commercial vessels. We get around 30 to 40 million a year out of issuing licensing to fishing vessels, commercial fishing vessels. And we also have a surveillance boat from Australia as part of their maritime protection and security activities in the region. So the fishing industry is well regulated in most part of the Pacific countries, and most of those illegal fishing companies that fish in our shores, we get them to be prosecuted in our courts. So they get high fines from a significant amount of money that they have to pay to the country for illegal fishing in our exclusive economic zone, or the 200 nautical miles. We were evangelized by the London Missionary Society in 1865. That's when the London missionaries arrived in Tuvalu, which is now called the Council for World Mission. 92% of the population belong to the Ecclesia in Tuvalu, where I belong to, which is the state church in Tuvalu. And it's a mixture of Congregationalism, Presbyterian, and Methodism, and so forth. Quite a lot of mixture there. It's a good blend, I would say. And shall we wait until the end for Q&A, or shall we take some question at the moment, or shall we wait for the end? Okay. Oh yeah, Isman.
Well, I was just curious, you're talking about the fishing boats. Where do they come from?
Oh, neighboring countries such as China, Korea, Taiwan, those fishing communities. We come from fishing communities as well, but we cannot participate in such a large scale of commercializing or commodifying our marine resources. So yeah, we enter into those kind of activities with the hope to generate incomes for the country. Oh, and right now there is a joint operation in Tuvalu going on by the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia to remove most of the active bombs that the US left and dumped during the Second World War. When the US left the country, they dumped all the military weapons in the lagoon and left the country. So we asked them in many times to come and remove the remains that we continue to see and identified by most of our fishing colleagues, fishing experts, but unfortunately it was quite a delay up until China came in last few months, I would say, and stir up a lot of geopolitical tension in the region. That's when the Big Brother started to wake up and do a lot of promising and touring around the Pacific countries. These are some of the major challenges that we are going through in the island. Apart from drought, we get to visit Tuvalu more frequent now, and storm surges also intensified. You can see in the picture that was during Cyclone Pam, and the wave that I showed at the very beginning of my presentation that seeped through the island and left the island soaked for quite a long time. And when it comes to food security and the issue of food safety is another big issue for us, because we don't have the ability to test the food that we import into the country. Raises a lot of health issues. And when it comes to internal and external displacement or relocation, the question for us that how long do we have to move further inland, given that we only have a strip of lands? How many times do we have to move inland? And in Tuvalu, you cannot buy or sell land. We exchange and we inherit lands in Tuvalu. So the more we move further inland, we are literally intruding to other people's properties and created some of the land issues in Tuvalu. When it comes to external displacement, we are talking about transboundary or crossing borders, despite that we have been offered and sometimes offered land by our neighboring countries, but we refuse to accept the offer because we feel that it's a political offer. And nevertheless, we have no intention at all to relocate and leave our country behind. We have no intention to let go the precious land that we were given by God to look after. Accessing finance is another difficult issue for us because there are a lot of things to comply with before we get the real funding support. So when the funding arrives and reaches the community, it's quite a lot of money has gone to consultancy work. Human rights versus collective rights, it's a big thing for us. Because in Tuvalu, we don't, especially in island communities, individual human rights does not exist. It does exist, but we do not allow that to exist in our community. We believe in collective rights. We believe in communal rights. We were brought up to be in a community. We live in communities. We sing and dance wholeheartedly as a community. We mourn as a community. So there is no room for individual human rights. And if you are to practice your individual human rights, it's might as well go to somewhere else that they appreciate your individual rights. Because peace, love, and justice for us lies in the heart of the community. Who we are as people, defined by our communal values, the principles, the values that we uphold in our societies. It's very important. The issue of sovereignty within another sovereignty, nation exodus, is another floating idea which we do not accept. It's very abstract, but it's there. You know, how can a country exist within another country? It's totally difficult. It's an abstract idea. When it comes to climate refugees, we've been labeled by the media as Tuvalu sooner or later will be submerged and the population will become climate refugees or environmental refugees in another place. We condemn and reject such deception because we do not allow that to happen to us. It's very unfair and immoral to be called climate refugees for something that we did not cause. Our contribution to the issue of climate change related sea level rise is almost next to nothing. It's 0.00001, and yet we pay the cost of climate change for the luxury of fuel. And it is unfair for us to accept such a label on us. If we are to relocate, if worse come to worse and we have to migrate or to leave Tuvalu, we must be given all the right to be Tuvaluans. We must be accorded all the right to exist as people, not a second-class citizen of another country, for something that we did not cause. And if we are to move, we should be given all the dignity and the respect that is needed for us to continue as Tuvaluans. And here comes the question of disappearance and ownership. In the absence of any international law that deals with or addresses the issue of submersion. We continue to raise the issue to the United Nations, especially to come up with a resolution that address climate change as part of the Refugee Convention, because the Refugee Convention only talks about people who fled from war and famine and had no options of returning home. And we continue to push for such resolution in order for our rights to be protected if worse comes to worse. Nonetheless, the question of ownership comes into the table when we discuss such issue, because if Tuvalu totally submerged because of rising sea, who will take ownership of our maritime boundaries? Who will take ownership of our exclusive economic zone? Can we still go to another country and maintain that ownership in the absence of any international law? So these are some of the burning issues, burning questions that need not to be brushed under the mat, but need to be discussed with churches, with communities, with the international support to ensure that we take ownership of what's belonged to us. And you can see the Bukasamilibili, an islet next to Funafuti, owned by the people of Funafuti, which they plant coconuts and vegetation in the past. Not just in the past, for the past centuries. It's now totally underwater. So when the media refer to us that in the next 30 or 50 years' time Tuvalu will be submerged, it's a lie. We are literally submerging right now. And we want to get the global attention on that. It is a matter, it's a fact that needs to be addressed and needs to be told. And we don't know how many times we have to repeat ourselves to the international communities that we are sinking right now. And what makes us prone and more vulnerable to such an issue is the fact that we don't have any other options on the ground. We don't have big land like the United States, Australia, and other parts of the world, that if they are affected in such a place, they can relocate it further inland. You saw in the beginning, it's just a strip of land. And we have lived there for centuries, for thousands and thousands of years. And now we are facing the issue of climate change related sea level rise. Tuvalu being the climate footnote, and this is what's happening to us right now. Either you get to see Tuvalu, the front page. If we are not there, we are in the footnote. We being used by most organizations to raise funds, to get the world attention on climate change. And yet we are not in the content of the research of the study. If you don't see us on the preface of the study, you get to see us in the footnotes. And these are some of the political things that we want to condemn and reject. And in the absence of any form of protection, such as adaptation measures in terms of seawall and stuff, during high tide, when high tide, I mean during full moon. Every full moon there is high tide. So it means that every 12 months of the year we get flooded. Most of the low elevation part of the island get flooded in Funafuti. And it becomes a salty swimming pool for our children. And this is something that when I look to my children's eyes, I always, it makes me think really hard, what will be the future for my children and for my grandchildren in the future? What will be the future for them if the international community continue to turn a blind eye to our call for survival? It's a life and death issue for us. And then institutions and families come up with some of the techniques or strategies to address the inundation of land. They start planting on raised garden beds. Some families planted on buckets, pots, and so forth that are movable during high tide. So we are slowly getting there, trying to determine what will be the best and the most strategic thing to do to combat not just the changing of the weather patterns, but also the rising of the sea. And these are some of the graveyards that were unearthed during the wave that you saw in the very beginning. And I think the message from them to us is very simple. If you want to leave the country, please do not leave us behind. Take us with you. And this is the sequence of life in Tuvalu. It's about people, it's about us, it's about our land, it's about our ocean, our moana, and it's about God that gives us life. When a mother gives birth to a child in the island, the placenta will be buried in the land, and we will plant a coconut tree on top of it. Even when the umbilical cord falls off the baby, either we bury it in the land or we throw it into the deep moana, to the deep ocean, signifying it signifies our connection with the land, our connection with the moana, the sea. And we also hold the conviction that when a child grows up, he or she will look after the family from the land and from the sea. So when we talk about the land in Tuvalu, or in the Pacific, we are not simply just talking about people living or residing in the land. We are simply talking about those who are resting in the land. So that's why it's always difficult for us when we start talking about migration. People come from outside. You can just get up and go to Australia or New Zealand, and they have a lot of land for you guys. They might sound simple for them, but it's not simple for us. It's difficult because we have that connection, that spirituality that ties to the land and to the ocean. The land determines our culture, determines who we are as human beings. You know, it holds our people together, our language, our traditions, and so forth. And that is why it's difficult for us to get up and go. And we are ready to say that if we are to sing, we will sing with God. It's not easy just to get up and leave. And may I ask that you join me in reading our theological statement that has to do with the environment and climate change. And I'm not sure whether I can read it from this angle, but I will try my best. We are also worried of the capitalist wisdom, which now poses a new agenda of fixing the environment. We are worried of the impact of sustainability proposals such as planting trees, changing light bulbs, tapping renewable energy sources, and the likes. Are they aimed at protecting Earth or safeguarding the prevailing exploitative economic model? We are wary of the idea that the created Earth is a fixable object for humans. We reject this capitalist deception. We believe that the rising of the sea level and the other threats is a clear indication that humankind has departed from the Creator God and the covenant made with Noah and all the creations. We are facing another issue in the island, and especially when it comes to switching to renewable energy. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that switching to LED or other form of alternative sources is not good, or switching to electric cars is not good. No, that's not my point. My point is the fact that we should not turn a blind eye to the politics and the economics behind switching to renewable energy. Who are we trying to save? Are we trying to save those who are impacted by climate change? or we're just trying to save the corporations and the companies. So we should not let go of that. We should see the politics that lies behind switching to these renewable corporations and renewable energy. They are good, but just don't let go of that political analysis. We as churches should know that. And here comes another theological crisis. So we are not only confronted by the climate crisis, but we are also confronted by the theological crisis. Our people, especially 60 years old upward, will continue to say that climate change is not real. Despite the fact we are facing all these waves and the heat is increasing, soil erosion and so forth, many impacts that we confronted in Tuvalu. But however, our elders continue to say that climate change is not real. I said, why? God had promised Noah that he will never send any more flood to destroy humanity, and it's in the Bible. It's just so amazing how our elders still hold strong to their colonial faith, the interpretation that were introduced to them by the London Missionary Society and passed on up until to this generation. It is just amazing how we see that for them the Bible is absolute and no room for other interpretation. So what we have done in the past and continue to do is build our capacity to start reading the Bible from a salted land. Try to read the Bible from a wetland. Try to read the Bible from the context of climate change, related sin for us. And try to come up with different interpretations that are relevant to our faith-based communities. So this is another theological problem that we are facing back in the islands. And here comes another question. Where are you, God? What have we done to make you angry with us? What have Tuvalu done to make you mad with us? What have we done wrong? Why does God not stop the climate crisis? These are some of the theological questions that we need to ask as Christian communities. And we should be asking hard questions. And it's not bad to be angry with God. It's just part of the human nature. We were taught in Sunday school that God is everywhere, God is powerful, God is, and so forth and so forth. And then when it comes to this issue, we start trying to defend God. But I think the deeper we ask these questions, the deeper our faith may be. And we should not be afraid to ask hard questions, because this is the reality of life in Tuvalu. One of the pastors in Kiribati that I know have left the profession because she don't have a very convincing answer to give to the community. So it's not just the climate crisis, it's a theological crisis. And now here comes the new religious movement to the island, the new evangelical movement. Continue to shout that all of these climate events are a good sign. It accelerates the return of Christ, the parousia, the end time, which I believe they have no social ethics at all. It is an issue that we should work as a community to address the threat of climate change. Because if a wave comes to sweep Tuvalu, it's not just about the Ecclesiastes and Tuvalu. It's about us, human beings, living on the island. ask the person in the back to help me turn to another slide, please. Just press the arrow. Yep. Second part of my presentation. I have a few more slides, 2 or 3 more slides. We get to participate in the International Forum, and Honorable Simon Goffey is our Minister of Foreign Affairs and Justice. The picture that you can see on the screen is when he delivered a statement from Tuvalu to the United Nations meeting in Glasgow last year, the COP meeting, half knee-deep in the ocean, and presenting the statement on behalf of the country, which went viral. It really captured and resonated with those who are also facing the issue of climate change related sea level rise. And our participation at the International Forum is very meaningful to us. And when we get to go to those kind of conferences and platforms, we get to hear people say that we are in the same boat. My response will be, we're not in the same boat. We are paying for the luxury of the very few. We are sinking. We are drowning. And we are calling the international community for support. So, this is the reality. And if we are to attend this kind of meeting, we want to put the human face of climate change. We are the human face of climate change. And we want to hold governments accountable for their actions, especially the industrialized countries. And we want to speak truth to power. And I think that's why Jesus was killed. He was not just crucified, he was literally murdered and killed because he speaks truth to power. And he took the side of the poor. And let me read this by Desmond Tutu. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. The role of the Levites and the priests play in the Good Samaritan narrative, they took neutrality as part of their journey. And we should not continue to appreciate such. We need to take the side of the poor. We need to make a stop and see to our eyes the bleeding Mother Earth that has been robbed, raped, and killed by the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and other financial institutions in the world. We should not continue to play the neutrality part of who we are as Christians. We must condemn them. What we must do, we must make a stop and support not just the people in Tuvalu, not just the people facing climate change, but any form of injustice. And I want to leave you with this, a very simple reminder to all of us. I want to live without fear of climate change. And I do believe all of us here does not want to live the fear of climate change. I thank you. And I will open up for Q&A, question and answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation. And so there are some questions here. And the first one is from, well, they didn't put their name on the card, but the question is, what is your counter answer to God promised us God will not flood you out of existence again. So.
Oh, a very good question. I mean, it's to do with the story of Noah. And I believe that the Bible is not it's not an absolute text. It gives us room for interpretation, and it's a 2,000 years old document that always allows us to have added value of our theological understanding and our community and our faith in God. So if you look into the story, and when I start reading the narrative from Noah, from a very materialistic perspective, you get to see that the animals and those who were allowed to board the ark were those who have the resources to board the ark. The animal were the clean animals, that can participate in the market, the grade A market of meat, the best meat in the world, the best steak, So, and the poor are the people who were floating outside the ark, that were unable to board the ark because they are poor. They have no resources to participate in the global market. I always look at the ark as a reminder of the global market that controls the world. And since we don't have power to control such, it only controls by few countries and few people, then we are left behind. We are left to be condemned to death and swim outside the ark. So, and when it comes to the reality of climate change, I think it's just common sense. I think we should not continue to be climate deniers. We have seen that. And if anyone wants to be a climate denier, you're most welcome to come and stay with me in Tuvalu and experience it for your own self.
Thank you. The next question is from Linda. And Linda says, you said that salination of your wells has made them no longer drinkable, the water in them no longer drinkable. So has Tuvalu considered desalinization plants like we have here in Kill Devil Hills?
Thank you so much. A very pertinent question, because we had some discussion with a few other presbytery that want to support Tuvalu in this course. We have you ever heard of the Living Water Foundation or Living Water? It's an organization owned by the Presbyterian Church of the United States. So they have built quite a lot of desalination plants in Brazil and other parts of the Central America and South America. They have supported quite a lot. So we are in the discussion of getting them there to do a survey, get a report done, and then we will ask some presbytery in the United States that are willing to fund such a small project to give us clean water. So thank you. She must be interested in funding or supporting our project.
Yes, and there is one additional question here from, I think it's Jeanne. And the comment, it's both kind of a comment and a question. If you didn't say, what do you see as the cause of climate change?
It's human greed. Very simple. It's human greed. And climate change has nothing to do with God. And that is a good news, I would say. I continue to tell my people it's a good news that this has nothing to do with God. If it has to do with God, then it's beyond our reach, it's beyond our capacity, it's beyond who we are as human. It's to do with us, to do with our attitude, to do with the way we live. For example, in Australia, I studied in Australia for almost 4 years. And the house that we occupied, myself and my children, I looked after them for more than 2 years while my wife was in New York during COVID. I collected all the furniture from the road, cooking pots, you name it, all from the road, because they start to upgrade. And then I start asking, why are they throwing all this into the dump? I I said, oh, they are upgrading before the tax return or something. I said, oh wow, what a life. Have we ever considered the amount of energy that went into production? Have we ever considered the amount of energy wasted to produce clothes that causes climate change, destruction, and destroy the environment? You know, quite a lot. And these people are living in the life of upgrading all the time. As in the island, we live in the life of recycling. If you're done with it, just give it to your neighbor. And when your neighbor is done with it, he'll give it to you. Life in the island is just about sharing and caring for one another. If my dad go fishing today, he will give fish to our neighbors. If our neighbors go to the bush today, he will bring some for us, for our family. That's why poverty does not exist in Tuvalu. Nobody lives in the street. Because we help one another. Life in Tuvalu does not measure by GDP. It measured by happiness, peace, and supporting one another. It does not measure by money, by the amount of money you have to make you happy. It does not measure in the fact that you have a nice big house. It measures by happiness. If you have happiness in your family, it's more than GDP that created by the West to measure our wealth.
Thank you. So I don't have any other questions on a card, but are there any other questions at this point from anyone in the audience?
It will be lovely to see your church support our desalination project. I'm just joking.
Well, thank you, and let's give our speaker another round of applause.
Thank you so much, and thank you for those who are listening on Zoom. Thank you so much.
And we do have a reception right after with some cookies and chance to be able to have further conversation. Thank you for this very eye-opening, thoughtful, theological conversation as we are able to consider the impacts of climate change and your experience. So thank you. As far as I know, unless anybody else has anything, we're concluded for now. Let us. Why don't we have a prayer? Gracious God, we thank you for the people of Tuvalu and for their communal aspect of caring for one another, and for this word of what we have that our speaker has shared with us tonight. We thank you for his voice and his ministry and his studies, and for the opportunity for us to live in this world that you have created, and your call for us to be good stewards and caretakers of one another and of this good planet that you have made. And as we face threats, we pray that we would be filled with compassion and a spirit that works together for your will. In Jesus' name, amen.